Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the From Grapes to Wine School Climate webinars. My name is Neslihan Ivit. I'm the Winemaking and Innovation Specialist. And today our co-host is Francisco Diez, Viticulture Specialist. And today we are happy to host David Stasiuk. He will talk about Flash-detente technology, and he will say no pressure, opening winemaking possibilities in Eastern Canada with the Flash-detente technology. Before we start, I would like to give some Zoom housekeeping items. You will have your audio and video turned off during the session. And to ask questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And during the session and presentation, we will monitor the questions. And after the presentation finish, Francisco will address your questions. An introduction to Perennia. Perennia is a provincial agency with a vision that Nova Scotia is a recognized world leader in producing innovative, environmentally responsible, safe food of impeccable quality. Perennia's mission is supporting growth, transformation, and economic development in Nova Scotia's agriculture, seafood, and food and beverage sectors. Our service areas are extensive. We offer services in agriculture, quality and food safety, product development. We have lab services, and we also serve to fisheries. And when we come to our wine services, our services extends from vine to wine. We offer site assessments, viticulture services. We have a plant health lab. We offer winemaking services, mobile bottling and filtration line. And we also have industry development efforts, as in the case of this presentation today. And today's presentation will look deeply into the Flash-detente technology. It is developed at INRA, National Institute Agricultural Research of France, in their Pêche Rouge research station in the 90s. And their aim was to reduce the skin contact time for red fermentations for red winemaking. And they accomplished their goals as currently it's manufactured by different brands. And we can see that currently used in different wineries around the world, including different countries in Europe, in California, in Chile, in China, and we also have it here in Canada. I will explain Flash-detente technology in a nutshell. It makes a rapid heating of the grapes. It heats the grapes very rapidly until 80 to 90 centigrade degrees. And then the grapes follows the vacuum chamber where they instantaneously cooled. This actually creates an effect on the skin cells. It ruptures them in a way that it creates kind of a net of the microfractures, and that enhances the extraction. That enhances the extraction of anthocyanins and tannins in a lower and shorter time compared to the other methods, conventional maceration or other thermovinification technologies. It also has some other impacts. It can remove undesired aromas such as methoxypyrazines, which are responsible of that green and herbaceous aromas in wine specific to some grape varieties. It also has been used in the grapes that are impacted by smoke taint and some grapes that are infected by botrytis. And with all the flexibility that it offers in the wine style, Flash-detente offers an opportunity for the wineries in different sizes. That's why we really would like to learn more about this technology and also its applications in Canada. That's why we have invited David Stasiuk. When it comes to Flash-detente, David is the most knowledgeable winemaker in Canada of this topic because he has a deep understanding of the technology as well as hands-on experience. David is a graduate of winemaking and viticulture at Niagara College. He has national and international winemaking experience in Le Clos Jordan, in Cedar Creek, Moët Chandon, Australia, Villa Maria, New Zealand, and 20 Mile Bench. After more than 10 years of winemaking experience, David joined Nuance Winery Supplies as technical sales representative for Eastern Canada, where he implements, adapts the winemaking products and technologies brought from France and Italy. And he also runs the mobile Flash-detente unit. With all this experience and expertise, please join me welcoming David. With that, I will stop sharing and leave the floor to you, David. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that great introduction, Nesli. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Just share my presentation. If you'll kindly let me know when you can see it.
Sure.
Are we all set?
We don't see it yet.
Okay, just a second.
Perfect.
All good?
Yes, all good. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. It's great to be here, and thanks for letting me be part of your webinar. So I'm going to speak today about my experience with the application of Flash-detente technology, mostly operating out of Ontario and Quebec, but we have done some processing for a winery in New Brunswick, not yet Nova Scotia, but we hope we can make that happen. So again, I'm David Stasiuk. My role is in technical sales for Nuance Winery Supplies. But as Nesli mentioned, throughout the last 3 harvests, I have worked intensely with our mobile Flash-detente unit. The visual you see here is a unit that we operated in BC. This is in the Okanagan, but our unit is almost identical to this one here. So as winemakers, we've all faced undesirable conditions. So whether it be underripe grapes or breakdown of fruit, or perhaps a stressed ferment from lack of nutrients or spray residue, but regardless of what comes our way, our jobs is to make the best out of what is handed to us. So we have to think creatively and think outside the box, or coming to this idea that we all have this winemaker's toolbox, we have to look inside the toolbox. And we have intangible products in this toolbox, like experience, which is arguably the most important. But then there's tangible ones like enological products or Flash-detente, for example. And the purpose of showing this visual is to remind ourselves that there's no one tool that's going to be the magic wand that we can wave and make the best wine or take away any of our problems. We really have to think critically about how to apply these tools, when to apply these tools, and really work on a case-by-case basis. So every vintage is different, every wine is different. And that's sort of the thinking that we take. For those of you that don't know us, just a really brief highlight of our company. Nuance was founded in 2013 by Thierry and his wife, Geraldine Lemaire. Thierry was involved in the creation and development of micro-oxygenation technology. He traveled the world extensively, sharing the technology and introducing it with many winemakers in wineries of all sizes. He was also a founding partner in Boisset Oak and spent a lot of time in Canada. And by chance, in 2012, when Nuance was becoming a company, we were able to transition some historical brands with a special focus in sparkling wine production. And we still specialize in sparkling wine production to date. But since then, we have really diversified our portfolio to offer a whole array of winemaking equipment and enological solutions. There's a quick snapshot of some of the brands that we represent. Some would look familiar to the audience today, but feel free to have a look on our website or contact us anytime. Okay, so jumping into the technology itself, this is our unit in Ontario. So Flash has been around since the 90s. but it was never available in a size that was mobile. It was always a permanent installation at a winery with quite big implements. And it wasn't until recently that it was engineered to not only fit on a trailer, but to fit inside of a shipping container. And that's, you can envision a shipping container fitting over that unit right there. So let's review the process. Obviously, knowing the technology and its success in winemaking regions around the world, when we saw this, we jumped at the idea. So this process diagram might look a little complicated, but I'll guide you through it. So this would be an actual flow-through diagram for a permanent installation at a winery. First and foremost, it's important that we destem the grapes. We want to work with clean berries. The Flash doesn't like petioles or rachises. So we're going to destem our grapes, either on a sorting harvester or through a destemmer. And from there, on our unit, we're going to go directly to a heating exchanger. Typically, we'd go through to a holding tank or a buffer tank, but on our unit, we're going to go from here directly to a heat exchanger. Then we're going to heat the grapes quite rapidly to about 85 degrees Celsius. And then from there, we're going to go directly to our flash tank. In a permanent installation, we'd go through to a maceration tank for a short period of time. But again, on our trailer, we're going to go up to 85 and then right into our flash chamber. So this flash chamber here has a vacuum pump that draws a vacuum of about negative 0.85 bar. So it takes that temperature of grapes and that negative pressure to create what we call the flash release. So when the grapes enter the flash chamber, what happens is the water inside the berries is expanded rapidly into a vapor or a steam. And because it has to exit the berry, it cracks the skins. It fractures the skins, it exits out of the berry, and then it's vacuumed out, for lack of a better term, it's vacuumed out into this tower, which we call the condensing tower. Inside this condensing tower, we have, just like a normal heat exchanger, we have cold water running on one chamber and the vapor running on the other. So that vapor is condensed back into a liquid and it's harnessed in a separate vessel. What happens to the grapes when they enter and the skins crack is they fall down onto a pump where they are evacuated or discharged into either a tank or your grape press, or perhaps the same bins that we use to dump into the hopper in the first place. Important to note that with that steam escaping goes an immense amount of heat. So there is an immediate drop in temperature from 85 Celsius down to about 33 Celsius from our experience. If a winery has a cooling system in line, it would be advisable to cool the fruit a little bit more if you could at that point in time. This visual again shows the same principle. So here we have the heating of the grapes. Down here we have the pressure at negative 0.85. And at that point, when we have a vacuum drawn and the steam is created, it's brought down to about 33 Celsius. So this was the first fruit that we ran in 2021. So we're just checking to make sure that all systems were working well. So that's that 33 degree mark. Taking a closer look inside the vacuum chamber, this is where the grapes would enter. And you see there's this sort of plate. Now ours is not perforated, but when the grapes enter, if there wasn't some sort of barrier or plate here, then a lot of the skins and grapes themselves would be sucked out into the condensing tower. So it would fail the system, it would clog the system. So what happens is some of the grapes that don't fall down, they hit that plate, protecting them from falling, from vacuuming up, and then they fall down on top of the must pump. And at that point, the vapor can still go around the barrier and be condensed here. The condensing liquid, we'll call that the condensate water. This visual shows how much the water actually expands. So 1 liter of water from inside the berries would become 10 meters cubed of vapor. One of the questions I had for the engineers was, is there a benchtop or a lab-sized version of Flash? Because we had a lot of questions around things like smoke taint or frost taint or rose taint, if you're familiar with that. And we wanted to be able to run some trials instead of having to reach out to wineries for big volumes to try. And the answer came back that our tank on the trailer we have is actually the smallest form factor that's been engineered to date to be able to achieve proper flash release. So whether you're trying to flash 1 kilogram of grapes or 100 kilograms, our tank is to date the smallest size. So let's look at some of the actions. First, when we're heating the grapes, much like traditional thermal maceration techniques, the heating is going to denature these oxidizing enzymes like lacase, and that's going to give us long-term confidence in the color stability. So we remove those oxidizing enzymes from the matrix, and we still need to ensure we have tannins and things there to stabilize the color, but at least we denature them in the heating process. Then we enter the flash vacuum chamber where we experience the flash release. At this point, we know we can maximize our color. There isn't any other way that we know of that you can achieve as much color. One of the things we've discovered, which is interesting, is in very low color potential blocks, maybe they're infected with virus. If they would normally get declassified for rosé production or something similar, we've been able to actually end up making red wines with them. As Neslihan alluded to, we are decreasing volatile compounds. So pyrazines, C6 compounds, which are prevalent in hybrid varieties, IPMP, IBMP from ladybug taint, which is a big issue for us in Ontario. We've done some tests to see the reduction. Again, this is not complete removal. It's specific to each scenario, but drastic reduction. Retinomyces from the vineyard, we haven't done the work ourselves, but we watched some studies and some presentations last year from institutions in the US that studied removal of Brett with use of Flash-detente, and it's been very effective. And then spray residues is more of an observation. We haven't had the time yet to actually run lab tests, but coming from a viticulture background and a lot of our colleagues, we can associate certain aromas with that of vineyard sprays, and there is a lot of similarities that we are picking up when smelling the condensate water. So more to be looked at there, but it looks like we are perhaps removing some spray residue. Not volatile acidity though. So unfortunately, the water is going to flash off before acetic acid. So we have to be mindful of that. In that case, we would probably try and clean things up in the vineyard beforehand. And with that vapor is going water. So we're actually removing 6 to 10% of the mass of the grapes in the form of water. And that is increasing the bricks of our fruit by an average of 1.5 to 2 bricks. This visual shows the decline and denaturing of the lacase activity. So you can see as we get up to that 60 to 70 Celsius mark, that's when we are completely denatured, and we're reaching 85. So the confidence is there that we're taking that out of the equation. Looking at the effects on the grape skin. So most of the things that we're after in the grape skin are located in the top area. So the phenolics, the color, the anthocyanins, aromas. And so when we release these when the grapes enter the flash, we're releasing most of these things right away. We're not waiting on normal extraction techniques for this to happen. These photos here are of the same fruit. On the left, we have a close-up of a grape skin that has not been flashed, and on the right, a skin that has been flashed. So you can see the cracking effect. This visual is showing us the amount of anthocyanins or color that we're getting in the must. So the darker bars represent flashed fruit and the lighter represents unflashed fruit. So after 1 day of fermentation, on average, we're getting as much color as we normally would after the end or around 10 days of a traditional maceration, whether it be pump overs, punch downs, whatever it be. Just consider it traditional maceration. After 2 or 3 days, the flashed fruit is exhibiting significantly more color than a traditional maceration ever would. But of course, the data is there, but we wanted to, as curious minds, wanted to see it for ourselves. So in 2019, our first year with the unit, our friends at Vineland Estates here in Niagara were really gracious to help us with this specific trial. So this was a less than ideal harvest of Cabernet Franc. It was, I think, barely 17 bricks at the time. And I think it was affected with grapevine virus as well. So although we could have looked at many different ways to treat it, we chose these 4 different variables. So on the far left here is no flash at all. So for the sake of explaining this, let's pretend we're working with 5 tons of fruit. So all 4 glasses came from the same fruit. In the first glass, we took that 5 tons of fruit, we destemmed it, brought it into a vessel and fermented it normally with punch downs, pump overs, whatever it be, and then pressed it off at the end. The second glass here, we would have taken 2.5 tons of that fruit, destemmed it, put it into a tank, and then the other 2.5 tons, we would have put it through the Flash-detente and pumped it into the same tank, co-fermented with that fruit, and then after 5 days of fermentation, pressed off the fruit. The third glass is 100% of that 5 tons flashed, brought into a tank and fermented on its own. And then the last glass, 100% flashed fruit, but only left on its skins for 12 hours. So brought from the flash into the press, put the caps on, let it macerate for 12 hours, press it off, and then ferment the liquid without any skins. And it was stunning to us to discover that at the end of alcoholic fermentation, we had more color in the wine that was only macerated for 12 hours and then fermented as a liquid than at the end of a traditional maceration. So this really sealed it for us and gave us the confidence to move forward. So of the many ways to approach flash, we'll look at 4 key areas. And this is specifically speaking to red wine production. In the first example here, we can look at making an intense and structured wine. When I think of structured and big tannins, I'm speaking more to high tannin varieties or varieties that can exhibit higher tannins. I'll explain why it'll be a little more ideal for hybrids. The second example is making a high-end wine that does not change the goalpost on wine style for the winery. It doesn't change the varietal typicity much in any way, if any at all. And it respects what the winemaker is trying to achieve and what they've done before starting to work with flash. The next would be trying to make a wine that is ripe, soft, and balanced, but not too tannic, and perhaps available for earlier to market release. And then finally, we can look at making a style that is very fruit driven. Perhaps we want to serve it chilled or make it more of a nouveau style. So how do we do that? In this example, we'd be looking at maybe not 100%, but a high percentage of flashed fruit. And speaking to hybrids in this scenario, from our experience, when we have flashed the whole batch, we've had the greatest reduction in some of the undesirable compounds that, like the C6 compounds, grassiness, hayiness, some of the gaminess, and we have a new light shone on the fruit profile that we didn't see in some of the varieties before. We've worked on quite a few, but Baco Noir, Marechal Foch, for examples. So when we do that, we see the biggest change for the positive. In this style, we would be looking at what I like to call the sweet spot. So this is kind of a globally accepted range for what people prefer the most, including myself. So we would take 30% of that 5 tons again, for example, and flash it, and then bring the 70% into a tank. And then I'll speak to it more in a little bit, but based on the vintage, we can adjust that 30% plus or minus to what we feel might be the best outcome. In any of these cases, we look at the idea that we have to monitor the extraction, because when we bring everything into solution, not only is the fruit warmer, it's going to ferment quicker if we don't cool it right down, but everything's there except for all the tannins. So the tannin extraction happens much more intensely. So we have to monitor the extraction and decide when it is that we'd want to press off and perhaps finish the ferment in liquid. Here we'd be looking at up to 100% of the batch flashed, and then a short maceration of about 2 days so that we're not extracting too much of those tannins. And then we would press off and finish the fermentation in what we call liquid phase, reducing the overall tannin load. Lastly would be a straight liquid phase fermentation, so flashing directly to press or a holding vessel, pressing off after a 12 to 24-hour maceration, and then either choosing to clarify the juice slightly or employ something like flotation. If we don't use something like flotation, then we'll tend to have more of a red wine character. But if we use flotation and remove a lot of the dissolved solids, then we can work more on an estery-driven, really bright fruit forward type of wine. Okay, so a quick visual again of the tannins. So you can see that after 2 days of maceration, we are almost at the same extraction of 10 days. So we have to be mindful of that in varieties that potentially have high tannin loads. Thinking about some of the savings that the technology brings, we don't have to think about any of the energy we put into cooling units or glycol units to cool our fruit down for a cold soak, because everything that we would achieve is brought into the matrix right away. Turning tanks over rapidly speaks to the idea that things are, why do we macerate? Because we need to extract things. So if we extract things more rapidly and they're there, then the ferment doesn't have to take as long to achieve the same goal. If we choose to employ a liquid phase fermentation, stylistically, we can consider the cap that we'd normally have taken away. So it would be a tank that was much more full, and you'd be using less tank space in your winery. And then reducing the amount of labor required, or just the pain of doing daily pump overs or punch downs. You may decide to still do some for oxygen depending on the health of the ferment, but you almost reduce or eliminate the need for pump overs in this case, as well as at the end digging out and pressing off, because you're just going to be left with some lees-like components. So this is probably the most important reason that we believe Flash has such a promising place in the Canadian wine industry, is the idea that we do face quite a degree in vintage shift. And in some wine styles, in some wineries, vintage variation speaks to the terroir of the place, the microclimate. It is a must. It is a desire to see a big difference in vintage variation. Not for every, I mean, some high-end wines or top tiers, winery owners and winemakers wish they could achieve the same benchmark every year. But speaking more to the idea of the middle tier, the entry-level tier priced wines, speaking to myself in Ontario, where we shop at the LCBO, you know, there's a handful of big brands that a lot of people we know gravitate towards, because there's a sense of confidence that when they grab that bottle, it's going to give them the same experience year in, year out. It might be slightly different, but it's nothing that's going to be shocking. Whereas I know that vintage variations can cause extreme shifts in the way that a wine ends up turning out. So the idea is to work with the flash again in percentages that make sense yearly, so that we can try and achieve something more similar year in, year out. Of course, we're faced with these climate shifts and extreme weather, so it's not going to fix everything. But again, it's a tool that's going to help us to play with the equalizer and try and mitigate the damage. In terms of supporting premium wine, we know that there's a lot of premium wine producers globally that are employing flash even on their top tiers. I'll give you one example of how I would consider using it. If you had a premium tier, a middle tier, and an entry-level tier, take a block that is medium plus to high quality and flash a portion of it and ferment it separately. And as the wines evolve or vintage comes to an end or what have you, if your high-end tier doesn't have quite as much color as you may desire or intensity, then you have this tool that you can use as a blending component. If you don't use it, then you can easily find a way to make it work within your middle and entry level tiers. It always has a place. So it's again how we use it and how we think about it improving all types of wine. Just to be repetitive here, it's one tool among many, and we just want to be using it with focus each year and adjusting how much we use. So speaking a little bit to the last 3 vintages from our experience in Ontario and Quebec in 2019, it was a cooler than normal year here and above average precipitation, but botrytis was showing up and a lot of low color and low bricks, as we saw with the example that we did the trial on. But we didn't really end up using much more than 50% of flash on batches. The odd case in late varieties where things got really bad, we did, but for the most part, we were in that 30 to 50% flash range. In 2020, it was considered by many to be an absolute banner year in Niagara, but it was so hot and dry that lots of young blocks with shallow root systems shut down. So they were far behind, and then they became sugar ripe at vintage, but not phenolic ripe, and had lots of pyrazines and lots of high tannins. So we worked on removing the pyrazines successfully, but approaching high tannins was different. So this is the thought about adapting to each year. We thought, why not try to remove the tannins up front instead of having to find them afterwards and potentially remove more components. So what we did was we took a portion of the batch and we flashed it and pumped it to press, took the rest of the batch and brought it into tank as we normally would. And then after macerating in the press, we pressed off the skins, leaving most of the tannins in the press with the skins. And we have this juice that's rich in color and aroma compounds. And we bring that in, co-ferment it, reducing the overall tannin load. And the results were awesome. So it made total sense. Again, a complete shift in thinking. And that brings us to 2021, which was the complete opposite of 2020. 2021 here, we experienced extreme precipitation through the whole growing season, leading up to harvest, and then all the way through harvest. So we saw extreme cases of botrytis where entire blocks were affected. Again, very low color, low bricks as well, because the berries were so dilute and so big. The bricks would get somewhere, and then we'd have rain events and things would just fall back down. So in a lot of cases, we employed high amounts of flash. And the main reason for employing the high amounts was to denature all of those enzymes, those oxidizing enzymes from the botrytis, and to get sugars to acceptable levels. So we ended up seeing a couple of weird things happening that I'd never seen before. One of them was, whether it's flashed or not, a lot of tannins just began to disappear in ferments. Even though we were adding quite a bit, they would just disappear. And so I guess our thinking was that a lot of those tannins were being bound up before the grapes were even coming into the winery. And then another weird thing that happened was on our flash unit, one of the indicators, the key indicators of things are working properly, is the temperature on our boiler. It helps us understand the flow of grapes coming in and to ensure that we're achieving the right heat when we're heating the grapes up. And there became a point late in the season where the temperature on the boiler was higher than normal and the fruit was going quicker than normal. So luckily it was on the first or second bin of this batch, but we tested the temperature of the outbound fruit and it was only about half of what it should have been for proper flash. So we scratched our heads for a while and finally figured out that it was the glucans from all this botrytis. They were so intense that they were almost creating like a toothpaste-like consistency in the mass of the fruit. So normally when fruit goes through a heat exchanger and it goes, tube and tube or what, it's able to move around and all the different surfaces of the grapes are able to get warmed up. But with this toothpaste-like consistency, we are only heating the outer layer of the fruit. So luckily we were able to catch it and we can use the flash heat exchanger just to heat as well. So we have a valve and we teed off, heated the grapes partially the first time. And then with a second pass, we were able to achieve the 85 Celsius and have a successful flash through the chamber. So something new every year, of course. So I just want to bring some of the 21 images to share with you from our experience to give you more of a visualization of what we've done. This was a Frontenac Blanc harvest that the winery wanted to make a rosé wine with. So there's not a lot of color potential here to begin with. So the entirety of this batch would have been flashed and then brought right from the flash into the press, where it would have macerated for a couple hours. Basically, the entire time that we were flashing the block, it could have been up to 3 or 4 hours, I can't recall. And then this was the resulting color. So pretty impressive coming from those grapes. And then after starting the third vintage, of course, our vacuum pump broke down on us. So we lost the ability to put the grapes in the flash chamber, but the fruit was picked. And this is the same fruit as from the previous slide. And it had to be processed while the vacuum pump was getting repaired. So this is the same fruit. And after chatting with the winemaker, we all decided to try thermal, like heating the grapes, because we can release some of the color that way. But that's the visual that we have versus the flash, which is quite a striking difference from the same fruit. These are Cabernet Franc berries from Niagara. So all these next slides are very characteristic of all the things we were seeing. So it looks like there's a lot of MOG and stuff in here, but there really isn't. A couple PDOs, but what you're seeing is very light colored berries, but a lot of skins that were breaking down, folding in on themselves. Most of this again is attributed to botrytis. Here's the closer look. I believe this is from the same batch. It's very, very light colored fruit, big berries, and then this really ugly looking appearance in the free run juice, which would be, which I believe to be the spores from the botrytis. Another shot I took, this was a Cabernet Franc block. Well over 80% of it was fully infected with botrytis. So botrytis was not picky amongst varieties in 2021. This is what you see the spores forming where the skins are cracking. And the spores start to form outside of the berries. Another we saw a lot of this, where the fruit coming in, you saw colored berries, but through the whole mix of the free run juice, there was almost no color. So whether it was losing its color, dropping out in the vineyard, or when it hit the bins, it was just very, very scary. Here, you can start to, it's hard to tell, but if we put our hands in here and lifted up this juice, it would almost feel gelatinous or like glue, and that was those glue cans that we were talking about. So really, really gooey stuff. Of course, passamento, it was tried, and when botrytis is present and there's moving air in rooms, it spread quite quickly. So it was really, really difficult to try it. You can see how it just took over. But you know, when we dumped these bins, it was just a huge cloud of spores. The result was very, very cool because we killed all that botrytis. A lot of this looking stuff. This almost to me looks like from a distance, like there's leaves in there, but that's actually just browned out skins that are broken down. So when you look really closely, you can see that there's lots of skins that have botrytis on them, and the discoloring and the brownness. So taking stuff like that, this is that same fruit before entering the flash, and then this would be what it looked like after. So quite a striking difference in color. Again, from there to there, and then this is the free run from both of those bins. So on the left is the flashed, on the right would just be the free run that we would have gotten. And then might as well look. This is what really nice. I think this was Merlot. Merlot did really well this year of all varieties. This is a nice block of Merlot that part of the batch was flashed, so you can just tell the difference by looking at it. This is just the geek in me wanting to share this cool photo. This is a time-lapse photo of our evaporation unit on the flash. So that water that's used to cool the hot vapor, it warms up and it's returned to the evaporation system where the water is sprayed over some fins, and then there's a big blower fan here, and it takes that heat away and shoots it up. So this was a nice starry night in Niagara. We caught that cool shot. And of course, what would harvest in Canada be like without snow or torrential rains? This is what makes our memories in Canadian winemaking so memorable, right? Okay, quickly touch on treatment on apples. We've done some trials out west and east here as well. This particular trial was, I think, Macintosh and Pink Lady. So just to keep it quite quick, this is the destemming or pulverizing of the apple into a mash. From there, it would be brought into our hopper and introduced through the heat exchanger the same way as the grapes. And then it would enter the flash chamber. From there, I forgot to mention it before, but on the outlet of the flash, we have an inline dosing pump. So in that dosing pump, we introduce enzymes. And because the outbound product is around 35 degrees Celsius, 33, we're at an optimal temperature for enzymes to work. So we introduced the enzymes, and then after, I think it was overnight, this is what we had, and it was quite a nice job the enzymes were doing. Normally, apples are then belt presses used on them. I'm not too familiar with using a belt press, but once they were broken down with these enzymes, the belt press was just not working. So luckily, they had a basket press in the facility, and so with the help of rice hulls, which is something we use a lot here, especially when we're flashing hybrid varieties that are hard to work with in terms of filtration and colloidal elements. The rice hulls worked amazing, and as you can see, there's very little apple product left, and we ended up with quite a high recovery. It was observed to be quite a bit more than normal. So the mostly clarified juice after settling, and then this was the product produced. You can see it, flash apple. The little explanation there. This is truck 59 in British Columbia. And from tasting it, there was an increased palate weight, an increased intensity, increased aromas, and it still retained a really nice freshness. So very, very interesting. And there's a lot more to be done here. But with increased yields and something with intensity, it's showing a lot of promise. So we hope to continue to work with apples, and we can work with them outside of the grape vintage as well. So we've done some cherries, some pears. We're open to try anything, to be honest. It's always about time and location. So, okay, so that's our unit there. And with that concludes the presentation. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I really hope we can organize the time to come out and run the trials with some of the wineries of Nova Scotia. So I'll hand the mic back over for the Q&A and address any questions if there are some. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. It was a great presentation. It was very amazing to see how the photos and we really live your experience of this harvest. It was great. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And Francisco, we can pass to the Q&A part, please.
Okay, thank you, Nestle. And thank you, David, for the presentation. It was amazing. It's very nice to see all that details, and on the photos, they are very helpful. So, and Thierry is saying, great job, David. So, meanwhile, I will invite the people who, to ask their question to write on the Q&A, please. It will be quite interesting if you can interact. And I will start, David, because I have a question about the potential of aging. So have you heard from your clients about their evolution in aging? It changed too much the profile? It has a difference with the product? They have to blend, or I don't know. That's my question.
Yeah. So everything has been really positively received so far. Obviously, with everything in wine, everything takes time, and it sometimes too long. We really wish we can speed things up, but I think it really has a great deal of importance to think about. Obviously, the starting fruit and what it's composed of, the ripeness, what sort of fruit we're dealing with in the beginning, and then how we apply the flash would be very different from an aging perspective if we steered more towards a earlier market wine versus something that's more intense. If we make something that's more intense and we bring more anthocyanins and structuration, then we can work with micro ox and we can actually build a bigger wine. It's going to be longer aging indefinitely, and we can speak about that at a different time. But I think it has, and you raised an important point that when we're working with flashed applications where we have liquid phase fermentations, I don't think I mentioned it, but it's very important that we bring tannin into the fermentation. When we bring tannin into the fermentation, we're stabilizing that color. And we have to, obviously, don't want to make something very fresh and light and soft and then bring too much tannin and have the reverse effect. So we just want to bring enough of the right tannin so that we really stabilize the color. But there's no reason to think that, especially considering that we remove a lot of those oxidizing compounds that are responsible for quicker evolution and quicker aging. It really depends on how you approach it and being mindful of what you're working with.
Perfect. Now I have more than a couple of questions, David, and they're quite interesting. So the first question is, any negative effect during fermentation?
Nothing other than, I would say, being mindful of the fact that you're dealing with a warm product on the way out. So I was talking about if you have further cooling in line, just to be able to take a few more degrees off. We have to be careful with the fact that, when we inoculate fruit that is already quite warm, over 20 degrees, our climax of heat in the fermentation is much quicker and much more powerful. So we have to be mindful of if we have cooling, to employ it. and make sure that we're not going to stress the yeast out. So stress on yeast from the heat and the rapid fermentation would probably be my biggest concern. If you're using flotation and you over clarify, for example, which is probably not going to happen, but you want to make sure that you have the right NTUs to have a successful fermentation, things like that. But in terms of anything else that I can see that would be interfering, it's not there.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So the next question is, how much work will you need to make a trip to Nova Scotia worthwhile?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We've thought about this. We were planning to come. Obviously, the pandemic was what is the main reason why we didn't get a chance to, other than the fact that everything happens at once in our industry, in this hemisphere. But it would be ideal for us to at least, not to put a tonnage on it, but to probably spend the better part of a week there, I think. And hopefully we could tie that in with our visits to Quebec and so on. So we're going to work through those details. But in terms of tonnage, the least amount that makes sense to do, and I'll say it this way, for a winery to trial would probably be about 2 tons. We can do 1 ton, but it's time consuming. It takes us about 300 kilos of fruit to get to the flash, from the hopper to the flash chamber. And then at the end of it being put through, ideally we would push that fruit in with the next fruit. But if we had to use water, then there's a slight chance of a little bit of dilution, not so much the worry, but time as well. So we can process between 2 and 2.5 tons per hour. This unit is not a commercial unit. It was developed so that people like us could share the technology with people. So it's not fast, which is actually really good, because then we can trial it with small batches, but 2 to 2.5 tons per hour. So in a full day, if we're all set up with all the fruit there, the most I've ever done in a day is about 30 tons. But I mean, it would be good to do between 10 and 20 tons per day. So let's say 60 to 70 tons would be ideal.
Okay, we can figure out, discuss in the future on how to proceed. I don't know the person who asked this question, but we can discuss in the near future.
Sounds good.
So very important question is, what is the cost to use this process?
Yep. So the cost is something that we look at. The cost for this year will be different depending on how we make things work. But the range it's around $400 per ton, which depending on the volumes that are put through, the cost can adjust. And then we supply tannins and untoasted chips, something I didn't talk about. So we bring in some tannins so that when we free up the flash release, we have sacrificial tannins immediately to work with components, and not too much that we would denature the enzymes on the way out. So we're working with enzymes that we can work with the winery's enzymes, but everyone usually just works with ours. So those costs are included in that as well. And then there's other costs that involve the use of a forklift, and we need fuel for our boiler and things like that. So there's some other things that are in the picture.
Okay, perfect.
Just for information's sake, there, in the US, the price is almost double, I think. So we're bringing a lot of value, I think, for the input costs you would have to put in downstream to fix problems, or to buy wine to blend or things like that. So, yeah.
Okay. So the next question is, will affect any other parameter like pH, TA, or malic acid?
It's a really good question. There is a slight increase. It's different. But the pH is always a funny one. Almost nothing that we've observed there. The TA will be going up because we're removing water, right? So when we remove water, the TA would be going up slightly. that's all relative to the other acids, but it's negligible, and it's nothing that we have had any issues working with whatsoever.
Thank you. We have two more questions, David. Can the use of flash allow for better stability? For example, decreased use of sulfites?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Can the use of flash allow for better stability? For example, decrease the use of sulfur?
That's a good question. I don't think I can answer that fully, but I would think yes, in the sense that we're taking out a lot more of those oxidizing compounds. So if they're present there, and those are things that SO2 is going to bind up with at the end of fermentation, then if we're removing them, then there's no doubt that you would be making better use of your sulfur additions. Yeah, but that would have to be checked for sure.
Okay. Thank you. So last question is, do infected grapes impart a flavor, etc., on post-flash mast and liquid material? Are all of the infectious negatives per flash discarded with the mast when pressed post-flash?
So so all those negatives, we actually separate them. So they're taken off and they're condensed into a liquid that's like water. It has a little bit of color, almost nothing, and it's harnessed into a separate tank, and that's that 6 to 10% of water. So we are decreasing the overall tonnage that we're putting in the first place, so that but we're increasing our sugar, and there's all the other positives. So we're harnessing that water that's filled with all the nasty stuff. Okay, and then the winemaker can take that water, the grape water, that has a tiny little bit of sugar, tiny little bit of acid, and then these undesirables, and they could treat it. They could put it through carbon or what have you, and they could decide to, maybe they'll use that because it's grape water. They could use that to freshen up a rosé or stretch something else if they wanted to. I didn't have time to talk about it, but we have another technology that we're working with. It comes from the food industry, and it's a color recovery unit. So we are trying to find the means to harness, because no one keeps the condensate here. We're trying to find a way, if we can harness it, then we can actually remove all of the color that's in the condensate and harness it, recover it, and then we would probably look to RO it and have highly concentrated, here it would be called VQA-able, very, very natural organic grape color, instead of bringing something artificial, which none of us do. But yeah, it would be interesting to do that, but everything else is separated, and you can use it if you treat it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, David. With this, we finish the Q&A section. Nestle, I don't know if you have any question to David, just to take part of his knowledge.
Yes, I actually had a final question about the turbidity of the juice after the Flash-detente. Is it ready to ferment, or are you suggesting other settling part if you will ferment only with liquid or other enzymes?
Yeah, so that would have to be a choice of the winemaker. So if we use some flotation, then we work quickly while it's warm, and we can work with a very approachable turbidity. It depends on the wine style. So if you want to make more of a red wine style, then we want to look at keeping a little more turbidity there. But if not, we would look at clarifying. And in all the other cases where we're keeping the grapes on the skins, we treat it like a normal red wine fermentation. So everything stays in the tank. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you very much for answering all our questions.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure.
Thank you, Francisco, for leading this session.
And obviously, I didn't put my email address, but maybe you can attach it to the presentation or something. And we're here. We're always willing to chat, and would love to answer any other questions if anyone has any. So thank you again.
That's great. Thank you very much. With that, we are finishing our session. I would like to thank all the attendees for joining us today. And I just would like to let you know that all the sessions are recorded and they are available on our YouTube channel, so you can watch them. We have this season also, we have the previous season's videos there. And also we are going to send you a survey. If you can send your ideas for the upcoming seasons, that would be great. Thank you very much.